stage of the season are you in right now in this camp?
Yeah, training camp doesn't start until November 12th.
Oh, wow.
So we're at no part yet. We're just meeting on a weekly basis as coaches to chat about players coming in, new players, players that we had last year and what their development plans are, and then just like our training camp plan heading into the season.
How many players will you bring to camp?
Not a ton. Like it's not like a NHL camp. I think there's probably 28 at camp,
Oh,
and
wow. Okay.
we'll end up carrying 23, I think, or maybe 25. So it's not a ton. It's like a pretty competitive camp.
No kidding. And where would, let's say I'm a university player, I don't get drafted in the PWHL draft, and I come to your camp and I'm like the 24th player. Like, is there a place where I can go to develop and maybe get a shot next year?
Yeah, it's so new right now.
Yeah.
So we will carry three reserve players,
Got
and
it.
they are ideally in market. They don't have to be in market, but they have to be in North America. Um, and so generally the reserve players will skate with the team throughout the season at most practices, and it becomes a lot of numbers. Usually it's like 90 and 14 forward, so it's a lot to
Yeah.
skate with every practice. But if you get into injuries, you need to have those reserve players. And then if you don't get drafted, then you can go to Europe and play. And there's no like agreed upon partnership yet between our league and the European leagues, but I think that's probably something in the future, whether it's Europe or like an American league type of situation, because there's going to be more and more players graduating that aren't going to have a place to play, that are future players in the league. But what do they do for those year or two where they have to develop? They need to go somewhere and play. So right now, that's the target is Europe for most of them. So which is going to really boost Europe's,
Totally.
some of their leagues as well, which is great to kind of grow the game. And then we'll see what happens with the league, whether expansion happens sooner than later. I don't know.
So, I mean, you spent obviously 16 years as the head coach of Guelph University. And I mean, basically the majority of that time, well, there would have been opportunities, I guess, to go to Europe. Like there really wasn't that carrot to dangle that most coaches have to say, hey, you got to buy in and work hard because, there's an opportunity at a higher level. How does this change coaching at that level? Because, I would sense that, the athletes are, I don't want to say they're taking it more seriously, but there's maybe a bit more of a, you know, looking out for themselves in terms of opening some doors and hopefully playing pro hockey.
Yeah, I think on the men's side, that's kind of been the coaching mantra for a while, right? They come to university hockey and they're getting ready for pro.
Yeah,
So, on the women's side, we've actually sent quite a few players to Europe in recent years, but it's more of a self-guided opportunity. Like it's not like
sure.
we're getting players ready for pro, and um, so I think it'll change a little bit. I mean, right now the carrot is just that there's going to be opportunity to continue to play, and it just
Yeah,
never really was there. It was like you go for a couple of years to Europe and then that's it. So I think it's not really going to change how coaches coach necessarily, but I think it will shift the mindset a little bit of players, especially in their, as they get into that second, third year, just really instead of their career coming to an end, they're really ramping up for that next level, that next career. So I think it will change a little bit of how seriously players will take the game in those final years. It's crazy. The girls that are coming into our camp, you hear about their education and they're like engineers and they've taken their MCATs and they're going to be
no
doctors,
way.
and it's
Wow.
crazy. And yet they're going to take this gap in their time where they're going to play pro for a couple of years, hopefully, and then go off and do these great, things. And, maybe they're overachievers, but I think a lot of it has to do with, they work hard in every area of their life. And now they have this opportunity to just continue to develop as players as they come through the camp system and getting into pro. And then, there's still room for them to have that second career afterwards, which, again, like on the men's side, I'm not sure that that's necessarily the pathway right now where, men aren't always finishing their degrees. They go for a couple of years maybe, and then they turn pro, and where the women are finishing their degrees and now they have this gap where they're going to be able to just play, and then they'll be able to go on and have great careers afterwards, things that really interest them and they worked hard for through their university age.
Well, I just had to write a letter to the University of Michigan president and athletic director and the board of regents in support of them getting a Division I women's hockey program. Which, given the hockey landscape, it's kind of bananas that they don't have a Division I program in the state of Michigan. I think they produce the second most Division I female athletes in hockey in the United States. And so while I was doing that, I started diving into some just research and data on women in executive positions, and the stats around those that played sport. It's astonishing. I had no idea. Like it made sense to me, but I didn't realize it was skewed so much. Like it was, I believe it was 90% of female executives played sports growing up, and 50% played college level sports. Can you maybe just speak on, because now some of these women, again, they're going to get a chance to play college and then pro. Like, can you draw some lines to like where that influence comes from, and what a valuable experience that is?
Yeah, I actually did my master's in leadership and I did a project on executive coaching and executives in the workforce and on the women's side. And it's a pretty phenomenal stat. Um, I wonder if you polled men's executives, what the numbers would be. I don't know. Like, has
It's
anyone
not
ever
as high.
asked that?
I did look. It's not as high, but it's definitely enough to suggest that there's an advantage, I guess.
Yeah. So, and I think like I mean, it seems pretty common to think that when you are involved in sports your whole life, you've got adversity, you've got struggle, you've got teamwork, you've got, you're not, you've got somebody in a position of power that's usually, um, you know, make or breaking your experience,
Yeah,
teaching you how do you take that information in, being able to process feedback as information as opposed to feedback being, a negative. A lot of people take feedback as a negative, and I think elite athletes sometimes struggle with that too, being able to take feedback and move it into the world of just being information, that it's not personal, especially the highest achievers. But as you continue to grow in the game, you learn that, and a good coach gets through to you that it is just feedback, it's just information, and it's to help you. So I think when you think about when people move on from sport or even become executives in sport, they've been through that, they understand how to give the information with that caveat that this is information, that it's not personal, and how you word that I think is important. And then just being able to work in a group and a team setting and understanding that, I bet you if you pulled those women too, not only were they involved in sport, they were probably held leadership positions on the teams that they were in.
sure. Yeah.
Inherently, it's pretty a natural progression through sport. So just all the things that sport teaches you about leading and collaboration and working together, I think it's pretty obvious that that's why those women end up, building the confidence to be able to work in a world that requires them to be in a position of power over people, but also manage them as a team. And that comes from sport inherently, whether you've got good coaches or bad coaches, good teammates or bad teammates. Those experiences are not something that you can get really anywhere else growing up, other than being involved in sports.
When did you know that you were maybe pulled towards leadership positions? Because, I mean, you were the captain at Guelph, and gosh, I didn't realize. I mean, you were young when you got that head coaching gig. You've been in 27, 28.
Yeah, I was 27. It's
Wow.
crazy.
So when did maybe the light bulb go on that this wasn't something that was just inherently happening? That there was maybe that you gravitated towards these types of opportunities.
I wish I could say it was like when I was 13 or something, but it really wasn't. I think I was in a position where I I had a lot of confidence in myself growing up, in my sports self. Never really, and then I don't think if you talk to my parents, like my parents were immigrants from England, they didn't play hockey. they put us in sports because it kept us busy. There was no ulterior motive. There was no like this will teach them to be hard workers, or there was none of that. And I think if you ask my mom now, she'd say like she has no idea where that sort of confidence and leadership came from, because it's not something that was ever lectured to us or anything like that. But I think probably that was the way that I became confident, was that it was never an expectation. It was just something that I did, and I really enjoyed getting better and helping people get better. And it started as teammates when I grew up playing, and then when I got the job at Guelph, it was, someone actually gave me a little bit of a push to apply for the job. It's not something that I think many women at 27 coming out of a career and finishing teachers college think, oh, I want to coach university hockey. Like, it just wasn't really something I
Had you
knew
been
was
coaching
possible.
prior to that? Like, was there from playing to that first year?
Mm, a little bit. I went to England and was like a player coach I was teaching over there, and they
Did
had
you
a
own a
women's
whistle,
team. And
whiteboard?
like I did a little bit in university. I was a camp counselor and
Wow,
did hockey camps, but I really,
that's
I was,
awesome. Like, by the way, like that's really cool.
yeah, and I was the right place, right time, and probably right gender, and I was an alumni. And someone took a chance on me. I was young, I was inexperienced, I was cheap.
Yeah.
And I look back on that experience, and I was probably taken advantage of in a lot of ways as a young female head coach. Not so much originally with the pay, but I spent 10 years almost, being paid a lot less than the men's coach who was hired at the same time as me. And
No way.
even though our team, everything about what our program was doing would have exceeded what the men's program was doing at that time, it didn't even occur to me until, you know, the last 10 years that maybe there was an equality issue there, or an equity issue. And it wasn't long before I left Guelph that, there was some equity that was built in, and the coach that took over for me had been my assistant for 8 years. And I'm so happy for her that she gets to go into a program and automatically has a little bit of precedence now. Like when I joined, there just wasn't precedence, and there was nowhere for me to go to move up. So it's not like, in the university system in Canada, it's tough to, people get jobs at universities and they move through the system, the pay scale.
Yeah.
Like they take a different job and then they move up, and then they take a different job and they move up. But there's no next job when you're working in athletics generally, unless you're going into management.
And
So
it's not managed like the NCAA where it's mandatory, where the pay and obviously just the treatment of the athletes is equal.
no, and there's definitely been a lot of steps in the right direction with youth sports, especially around kind of their scholarship funding, and it's the percentages between men's and women athletes and things like that. So there is some really good things happening there, but the women's programs in the sport that I know anyway are generally have been sort of second class programs for a long time, and are just starting to become equal. But there's certainly no programs that I know of, other than the University of Montreal, who only has a women's team, that are the team, or are paid. The athletes have more, or the coaches are paid more, and like I don't know if I could. And there might be, I haven't done research, so I can't say that there's not any women's coaches that are paid more than men's, but I think those would be harder to find. And some women had really had to fight for that, if that's the case.
Well, I'm sure, but I would have to think, like, I just recently watched the doc on Nebraska women's volleyball, which is fantastic. And it's not just, I know there was a lot of fanfare when they played the game at the football stadium and they had like 90,000 people, but it's about like building the program, and really well done. But, just in general, I mean, there's multiple women coaches in the NCAA making seven figures now. And I think that, I spent time in youth sports as well, and it was pretty clear. We would go down and play exhibition games in the States, and it's like one of these things is not like the other,
Yeah.
in terms of just the overall treatment. So I feel like that always has to flow uphill to us north of the border. But I would have to think, like, just given everything that's happening with the WNBA, like March Man, all this, like, have you ever been more excited to be just in the position you're in, and just what the future holds, not only for coaches but for athletes as well?
It's such a long time overdue, and I'm so lucky to be part of the like inaugural group that's working in this league. And so much of it, a lot of it was, I think there was some really clever marketing, and the way that the league made the game really accessible to people, like on TV and through YouTube and all the things. But the fans were ready. Like
Yes.
it was just like there's been other versions of women's pro hockey, and there's been other versions of other women's pro sports that just haven't it just hasn't happened. And for some reason, the fan group was ready. And it's not just, the women. It's fans across all different genders
Totally.
and, races and everything. And so the timing was really right for this league. And I think the PWHL is building off of the success of some other programs, but also setting a really good, precedence for the programs that are coming behind, like the Northern Super League, the Women's Soccer League that's coming in spring, and even the WNBA coming to Toronto. I'm sure that was in the works already, but there's a lot of excitement around it now, and I think Toronto's market is really leading the way in a lot of the PWHL pieces, and I think the Toronto WNBA team is it's going to sell out just as
No doubt.
quickly as the hockey team is. So
Yeah.
it's great.
So you're 27. You get the gig. I'm sure that's pardon me, really exciting. The hockey side's one thing, but at the university level, there's a whole host of administrative responsibilities and tasks that if you're not dialed, like it, you wouldn't know. You
Yeah.
wouldn't know. So where did you? Who helped you? Like, how'd you get started?
Yeah. So I got married a few years before starting at Guelph. And when I went to England to coach, my husband was coaching over there as well. So we're both hockey coaches. And I think, it's funny because his dream and goal in work was we went to teachers college, but really he wanted to coach. And he was like, well, there's this job at Guelph is opening, you should apply. And I also, my former coach at the time also had suggested I apply. I was going to join him as an assistant. So when I got the job, it was exciting, but like terrifying. Like I got it in late August and we were
Oh,
starting.
geez, are you
Oh
serious?
yeah, it was like we hit the ground running, and I had to, there was a reason why the job was open and they were looking for a fresh start. And so, there were a lot of tough decisions that had to be made in that first couple of weeks, that I probably looking back was not ready for. I had to release some players that had been there for a few years and try to build a program that the core of the team had quite a lot of success, but really had to change the culture and build the culture, which is not something I really knew anything about other than being a captain, and that sort of idea of culture. And this is going back, quite a few years now. So it wasn't quite as hot of a topic, I don't think, about building your culture and all the administrative stuff. It was way less then than it is now. Like one of the things I'm loving about being in this new league is that I get to do hockey all the time. Like there's not this
I
whole
that
other job. Like you're the GM and the coach and the assistant coach and sometimes the equipment manager, and you're the logistics person, and you're ordering the equipment and you're making sure that all the food's ready, and academic advisor, and it's a lot. So I feel like I lost sight of being a hockey coach, towards the end. Not lost sight of it, but just didn't get to do it enough. And so my days got longer by trying to build in the hockey stuff. And then I did my master's when I was in my last couple of years, and I had kids, and my husband was coaching somewhere else, and like it was crazy. And now I feel so much more dialed in and focused on what I'm doing, where, and not that I miss a lot of things about being with the university age athletes. And I loved being part of their development and their growth. But I wasn't, I felt like I was a manager as opposed to a coach at times. And so
sure.
it's been, it took me a long time to figure out the balance in university hockey, and it kept changing. And now I feel like, in season for pro hockey, there's not a lot of balance, unfortunately. I mean, there is. You got to really work at it, but you know that you're going to get everything out of yourself in the 6 to 8 months that you're really busy with the season, and then you're going to have downtime. But in that downtime, you don't have to do all the other stuff. You get to look back at your season, and you get to reflect, and you get
Yeah.
to build on new ideas and go to coaching conferences and do all the things. So yeah, it's a whole different beast.
So, can you give any examples of areas, whether it was from a preparation standpoint or maybe spending more one-on-one time with athletes and their development? Like, what are some areas last year where you're like, holy cow, like I can really lean into this way more than I would have been afforded at the collegiate level?
Just the details of the game, like it's been a change for me going from a head coach to assistant
I was going to
coach.
ask about that.
So
Yeah,
yeah, so that's been part of it. I think, when I think about like last season, I think I was challenged a little bit to find the confidence to give as much information as I know that I have. Um, some of it was, working with athletes that have, been playing the game a long time, and they're obviously they're Olympic athletes, and so there was some of it was that,
for
and
sure.
then also just moving into a world where the details really matter, because the basics of the game are things that I think, like, a lot of times we assume that players know things that we know as coaches. It's not always true. Not always true.
Yeah.
So I think that was part of it too, was just being okay with giving information that maybe I thought they knew, but maybe they didn't, and then building conversations off of that. So I think moving into that pro game, really, a lot of it just came down to the details. It's less about their life and more about how we're going to extend their career and make them achieve the goals that they want for that season. And now they're playing for contracts, so it's every decision that you make as a coach now has an impact on their future, in a way that it didn't at the younger level. So that's probably the biggest thing.
You're at Guelph, so you have a great run from, gosh, 2017 to 2019, um, three consecutive OUA championships, and then in 2019 you win the national championship. And we talk to college coaches on here all the time, and I think particularly in that environment, like it is a slow build. It is a slow build to kind of build a program up to that level. What were some of the early lessons that you learned that there's no way you would have learned them unless you were just in the thick of it, um, figuring it out?
I think one of the earliest things that was given to me as advice was to not sacrifice talent for character, not sacrifice character for talent. And it sounds really good and it sounds easy, but it's not easy. It's hard because you're tempted by players that are really talented, and you think, well, we'll just, they'll be fine. I can help them. I'll change, any little thing that's going on with them. And it wasn't until I really believed that, and when I started building a team that had the right pieces. I mean, we weren't the best team. If you ask any coach that was there when we won, we weren't the best team at nationals. We didn't have the best players. We had the players that meshed together the most and were willing to do whatever it took to win. And it's a special group when that happens. And I think anytime you ask a coach who wins something, like, what was it? What was the key? And they tend to not be able to verbalize it. And it's because it's the people. It really is. And it's like so cliche, but it was 100% the people we had. We had actually introduced a couple of newer ideas to our group as well. And they were a group that received them in a way that some groups wouldn't have in the past. And I think that was really important for us because we were playing a game that other coaches didn't recognize in some areas.
So these were
And it was,
tactical ideas.
yeah,
Are you able to
yeah,
share?
yeah. There was just, it was like 2018, and we had started having our D surf up in the neutral zone. And it was not something that was happening in the women's game. And, we were the way we were attacking offensively with, across the line and having like dot drivers and driving pucks deep in the zone and things that, I had picked up here and there in with some different development coaches. And the summer before we won, we had, so Daryl Belfry he used to run this boys camp,
Yeah.
and it was for minor hockey boys, and they'd pay and they'd go on the ice with them, and he'd run like 6 hours a day. It was crazy. And one day I reached out to him and I was just like, hey, have you ever thought about running a girls version? I knew he had a daughter, she was around the right age, and like when he does something, it's like he does it. He's like, yeah, let's do it. So we were like, well, we'll host it here. So we got the ice. My assistant coach and I built like kind of the agenda, and he just showed up and ran it. And he ran it with like Mike Ellis and Denver Manderson and him. And like we had all these great hockey people on the ice. And we were like, hey, could we just come on the ice and, push pucks? And he was like, yeah, for sure. And by the end of the session, I think it was like 3 days, and we didn't have very many girls. We didn't get the word out. People didn't know who he was on the women's side. But by the end of the camp, we were sort of running some things and helping instruct some of these things. And it was stuff that we hadn't really done before with our group. And we're like, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to kill plays early. We're going to give our D permission to be going forwards and close their gap by skating forwards. And I remember going into the national championship game against McGill, and one of their coaches that had been kind of involved in that camp came up to me and said, I can see what you're doing. Like, I see it
No
all
way.
over your team. He knew what it was. But I think for him, I don't know whether it was too late for his team because they were out of conference. He was with McGill. And so was it too late for them to be able to build a defense against it or build an offense against it? I don't know. But, we got away with a 1-0 win in the finals. And I really think a lot of it was to do with not just our style of play, but our leadership too. There were some fires that were in the background that we didn't find out about as coaches until after, and our leadership group just took care of it. And that doesn't happen very often in my experience, where your captains, you always tell them like, we'll be there to back you up if you need us, but there's things that don't need to come to us. Like, just take care of them. And that doesn't
Yeah.
usually happen with this generation of athletes, and it happened. And that was a big part of how we got to where we got to. So a little bit of both tactical and then culture and leadership with the group.
How important is it, you know, particularly when you're in a program for a long time, to continue to evolve, both to keep pace with the game, but also just for your players to sort of show up to the rink and feel like, hey, like we're evolving, like we're a part of a process. And this isn't like, this year isn't the same as it was my first year 3 years ago.
I think it's everything. For me, it's like a cat and mouse game. You're either trying to negate what another team's doing, or you're playing your game and having another team negate what you're doing. And I think we got to a point where we were often the initiators of change, and then players and other teams had to catch up to what we were doing. There were obviously around special teams. There's lots of times where you're manipulating your special teams to beat someone else's changes, but overall, I think our group, really continued to grow and develop as coaches. And professional development for me was like number one on the list of things I was doing in the off season, because I felt that I wasn't doing enough hockey often in season, that if I didn't get the out of season development piece in, then we would just be the same, and I would go back to just doing the things I'd always done because I wasn't necessarily excited or have time to try something different.
So with that in mind, I mean, you and I met, I'm trying to think of the year. It was like 2017, maybe summer, Barrie, Ontario. I was doing my HP1. I had to fly out from Vancouver to do it in Barrie because our conference was the same weekend as HP1 was hosted in BC. You presented at that, and it was excellent. And presenting's hard. Like, making it engaging is hard. I don't sense that was your first time doing that, but I'd be curious to know, you know, what has been the value of putting yourself out there, putting your hand up and saying like, I'll present. And part of that is, I mean, I think a big reason why I know it's a big reason why a lot of like NHL assistant coaches, for example, come and speak at our conference, because it puts them on a stage, and it's an opportunity to flex a muscle that they're going to need if they ever become a head coach and they're in front of the mic every day.
Yeah, I think Gosh, I think that was actually probably one of the first times I was presenting when I met you.
Oh, good job.
I
Good
had
job.
thanks. I had done some work on being a group leader, but never actually being in front of the room and presenting, and uh, never really had major issues. Like I don't get super nervous when I'm about to present. I do think it's at times there was challenges with, like at those HP1 events. It's usually, I don't know, a room of, if there's 150 in there, 140 of
It's
them are men.
105% males. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's uh it's definitely been, that's been a challenge. I was worried that I wouldn't come across that I knew what I was talking about, even though I knew inherently that I did. So, I think the more often you can get in front of a group and present, and then even if you have one person come to you after and say, "Hey, I really liked that," and it's one little thing, it gives you the confidence of, okay, well, at least they took something out of this presentation. And that's what kept happening. I would present and someone would come, and it wasn't the women in the room that would come, and it wasn't just the men coaching girls hockey that would come. It was coaches. And the longer I'm in the game, the more excited I am about the idea of women coaching at high levels, because it's not women and men, it's coaches coaching. And to me, that is the next phase of coaching in our game at the highest level, is that we're just coaches, and you're seeing it across all sports now. And if you've got a great brain for coaching, and a great way of building pedagogy in the way that you coach, and the development of the drills and the systems, and it doesn't matter where you've come from. And you see that some of the best coaches in the world didn't play at the highest level. They just know how to deliver. And so those opportunities to stand up in front of a room and deliver, it gets you to really dial in on what your thought process is before you present, because you have to when you're presenting.
Well, so two things. One, I remember you did that presentation in Barrie, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to talk to her after and see if she'll come do my conference." And and there was a lineup of people that want to pick your brain. And I was like, "Jesus, come on, guys, let's go!" Like, I got more stuff here. So, obviously, made an impact. And I would just say this too, like, I get asked a lot, like, and again, we are incredibly blessed to work with, you know, the the best coaches in our game. And people ask, what stands out about the head coaches, and it is absolutely when they step in front of a group of people. In fact, when they walk in a room, there is a presence, and I don't know how you teach that other than they get a lot of reps. But they can get in front of an audience and they can clearly articulate. They can make the complicated sound super simple, and they can just command a room. And that's and I think the only way that listen, maybe there's a book you can read or a potion you can drink to figure that out, but from what I can tell, it's like anything we're telling our players, you just need to get your reps in. And so I would just encourage anybody to take advantage of opportunities to present, get outside your comfort zone a little bit. And speaking of presenting, so you spoke at an event we did recently at St. Andrews College, and you talked about breakouts, but specifically breaking out through the middle of the ice. And I watched that. I think one of the important ingredients is that you and I probably both came from an era. Again, I don't want to date us, but where our coaches probably said, when you get the puck, the only option out of your zone is either uh, move it up to the winger on the hash marks, and if that's not available, it's off the glass and out. And so when we're encouraging players to do something new, like break out in the middle, inherently there's going to be mistakes. And the mistakes in that part of the ice, a lot of time can end up in the back of your net. How have you learned to live with that, or to, prepare players to say, hey, like, this maybe isn't going to go super smooth at first, and we're all together on this?
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest fear, and the reason why pucks went up the wall and went up the glass, because coaches are like, well, we're not going to put the puck in the middle of our own ice in our own zone. I think part of there has to be a safety there. Obviously, your players have to know that they are going to make mistakes at times, and it's, going to end up on someone else's stick and maybe in your net. How you present it and how you build into that gameplay, I think, is so important. And if you can present the big picture of, if we can break it up the middle, we're going to have so much more space, and then we're going to go on offense. So right away, you get players excited about the idea of going on offense because that's what everyone wants to do. But then it's the way that you teach the details that are required to go through the middle of the ice. So we're not throwing pucks to the middle of the ice because I said to. We're placing pucks there after we've scanned and grabbed information, after we've communicated, after we've recognized that we've turned a forechecker's feet, like, that we don't always have to be facing the middle of the ice before we make the pass, that we can do it while we're facing the glass still, and we can have trust in our teammates. And all those little building blocks, not only do they get your players more prepared to do it, when your players make a mistake, you can, instead of like it being a personal thing, you can go back to them and say, what did you see there? Did you do these steps? And if they go, I'm not sure that I knew that guy was coming. And then you can either go to video or even in game go, well, if you didn't know he was coming, then that means you probably didn't take enough time to gather that information. So it becomes a little less personal for them, and it's going to happen. It's going to end up in your net, and there has to be an understanding, even with your D partner or the forwards or your goalie too, that these mistakes are going to happen, and how you're going to pick each other up out of those moments is really important too. Like, everyone's seen that basketball clip where the guy's got his head down and the guy comes over and lifts his chin, and
Yeah.
to me that clip it speaks volumes, because that's the way you have to respond to a play like that when you're trying something new. If it's playoffs and you haven't done all the steps you need to do and you turn that puck over in zone, probably people are going to be upset with you. But as a coach, if we get to playoffs and one player has consistently done that all year, then we'll probably have a different plan for that player.
Sure.
Maybe that player is not making passes into the middle of the ice because they're just not quite ready to gather the information they need. So they're going to either go east-west or they're going to go up the wall. And the winger's approach to that might be a little bit different. So
as you're building this, and I think that, you talk about, the confidence you gain as a coach. So I think as much as we have to build players' confidence up, it takes confidence in a coach. Say, I'm going to try something new that might not work, or maybe my players think like, what is she doing? Building this in. But over those 16 years at Guelph, at what point did you have enough reps where you started walking on the ring? You're like, I know I can do this. Like, I know I can lead this group to a national champ. And I know I've had enough conversations where everybody there's a difference between being a coach in title and walking in a room and saying like, I've got this, and I can go up to Natalie Spooner or whomever, and I know I can help them, make them a better player. And that's, that takes time.
yeah, I think it does take time, especially when you didn't play at the highest level. Like, it's just a little easier if you've been there, because you automatically have a bit of a respect from a player, because they're like, oh, they've been here, they've played pro, or they've whatever. So I think having not done that, it takes a little bit more time. I think the moment that you feel that you can confidently back up what you're saying, either it doesn't always have to be with video, but it can be able to start a conversation with somebody. Hey, like, I saw this, or I've been thinking about this. What do you think? I think that goes a long way in building confidence and trust with players, is engaging them in the conversation. And some players are going to be like, oh, tell me more about that. And some players are going to go, yeah, I've been thinking about that too. And some players are going to go, that's not going to work. And then you know where you're starting from.
That's
and
great.
So, I think, I don't know, even as a head coach, if you ever feel fully confident in everything that you're introducing. Otherwise, you probably are at the end of your coaching career, because if you're not a little bit unsure about how something's going to work, it means maybe you're not taking enough risks and changing things. So I don't know if you ever really get confident, fully confident, but certainly it takes some time to build the confidence to be able to have those conversations and start those conversations with people.
I've noticed a theme here that when you reflect on interactions with players, it starts with you asking a question. How important are asking good questions to coaching?
I think, even at the youngest age group, if your players don't know why they're doing something and you're just constantly telling them, then there's not going to be as much learning and growth as maybe you hope. So by starting conversations with questions, you basically have a starting point of where people are at. And it also quickly either builds trust or makes you recognize how much you need to build trust with a player, and what's it going to take to convince this player that this is good for their development. And sometimes conversations with players are like, huh, I hadn't really seen it from their perspective on, like, I think this is a great idea. And then they go, yeah, it sounds like it's a great idea, but these are the things that are stopping me from trying that. And it might be like the speed, or it could be how quickly the forecheck's coming, or whatever it might be that I haven't seen from their perspective on the ice. So anytime you can ask a question to gather information about where they're starting from is just going to help you introduce your ideas or even change your mind about ideas, because as coaches, we're not always right. And it's easy for us to black and white X and O a system and it looks
Sure.
like it's going to be great. And then you actually talk to players and they go, yeah, that looks really great on the whiteboard, but that is not going to work. And here's why. Um, and I think, at the highest level, that's probably what the best coaches are doing. Is it's not that autocratic approach where it's, well, I might be getting my words wrong, but it's not like you know, I know everything and you're going to do what I say. If the best players in the world are the best players in the world because they see the game differently than everyone else. So if you're not engaging them in conversation, then you're not going to get the best out of them or the players around them.
Um, so you have to tell the truth in this next question. Have you seen the Toronto Sceptres new uniforms?
I have not.
You haven't?
No, funny story too. When the name was released, I think it was one of the best kept secrets in pro sports ever. When the name was
It came out
released,
of nowhere. It was just on so like all the teams. It was so well done. It was so well done.
I was walking home from I walked my kids to school that day, and I was on my walk home, and my mother,
Hold
my
on. Did you not
70
know the name yourself before it was announced?
no, nope.
Really?
My 70-year-old mother texted me and said, "We love the name." And I was like, "Oh, well, what is it?" So, yeah, I didn't know it. I didn't know it.
Wow. What do you think?
It's growing on me. It took me a minute. I love a good like fantasy story, so I like and historical, fictional novels. So I knew what a scepter was, but I think a lot of people, first of all, didn't know what a scepter was.
Yeah.
Um, and so, but it's not the actual scepter that's what's drawing me to it. It's the story around, like, the way they're building the story around like hockey royalty and the Queen Street diversity on Queen Street, and this idea of, um, I don't think it's meant to be related back to the monarchy. It's meant to be a symbol of power within women in sport and women in this city and in this hockey team. So the way that they're marketing it, I think, it's really growing on me. And the actual logo, I love. I think it's great, other than the whole Taylor Swift thing.
I haven't heard the
Um,
Taylor Swift thing. What's that?
oh, there's her video. She did a video on, what was her song? Um, Shake It Off, I think, is one of her big songs. I'm not really a Swiftie, but
Yeah.
and there's this video of her, and she's in a cheerleading uniform, and she's wearing a TS, and it's like the same colors and it looks very
Oh,
similar.
I never even thought of it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the Swifties were on it right away on social media. So,
She would embrace
but
that.
hey, maybe they'll come watch now.
Well, you know what? It reminded me of, and maybe this was more front of mind for us, like when Seattle came into the NHL and the name the Kraken came in, and there was a lot of pushback, like on the name and the branding, and everybody's like, oh, they're going to call them the Crackheads and all this. But having been down to a couple of games, and you touched on it, they've sort of created this whole narrative and story. Like as soon as you walk in that arena, you're just part of it, and you feel like you're part of this thing, and it's way bigger than just a team on the ice. And just, in preparation for this, going on the new website, which I think is still evolving, but you could already see, like, there's the mascot, there's like how are kids going to show up dressed at the games, and you're like, this is going to invite everybody in. And I think part of it's because it's different, and it's not, I feel like they've built a brand that's going to stand out in the city of Toronto, where frankly, you got to stand out there. because it's there's a lot to do. So yeah, I'm really excited to see when the uniforms drop, and I can only imagine if I'm a player, like it's just going to be great to go to the rink and feel like you know you gotta you've got something behind you.
Yeah, like an identity behind you.
Totally, yeah. And I thought I was full credit to everybody like last year that did it with all kind of the generic uniforms. Like I would have to think that as much as that shouldn't matter, when you've grown up your whole life and you've represented your town or your school or you've represented something, to not have that must have been a little bit awkward at first. But I'm sure everybody's stoked to get this season underway with the brand behind them.
It's funny, because I did a presentation on kind of the success of the league, and it was kind of around risk and resiliency. And I talked a little bit about a risk that happened that was really it. They didn't really know what the outcome would be, but by not naming the teams, the whole world knows what the PWHL is. Like
That's interesting. Yeah.
everyone knows PWHL Toronto, PWHL Montreal, so the brand of the league got talked about in every major market around North America for sure. And then they also, like, I think in some markets they really exceeded expectations on their branding and like selling merchandise. So then when they turned around and sold out of PWHL Toronto, just the generic jerseys, and now they're going to sell it all in like a Septres uniform instead. So it's interesting to see the way the merchandising is going to change, um, how that how that will happen with the merchandising, and whether they'll continue to rebrand or make more money off of the new branding. And I think the players, like you said, it's one thing to play for the logo on the front of your jersey, but they truly were playing for their city, right? And so there's just all these little like risks that happened that actually really paid off. And I think there's a lot of excitement around the new branding, but I also think the way it worked out last year, it's a real positive for the league and the growth of the league.
Yeah. Well, I know it really kind of resonated with me with Utah coming to the league and Ryan Smith, their owner, when he made the decision, like, we're not going to rush the name thing. And I just remember him interviewed, and he's like, these things, it sounds simple, putting a name, putting a logo together, but he's like, this is something we're going to live with the rest of our life. Like, we got to get it right. We got to invite people in. We got to get them. So, I guess in hindsight, I can see why the league was probably a really wise decision to give themselves the runway to get it right. How was, you go from being a head coach for a really long time to being an assistant coach, and I think on any good staff it's a collaboration amongst the coaches, but ultimately the head coaches makes the decision. And I get the sense that especially at the pro level, um, that part of being a good assistant coach is being able to move forward with the decision even when it might not have been yours, or maybe you don't even agree with it all that much, but you got to show up with your players. And that's, again, sounds easier said than done. How did you sort of adapt to just functioning in those conversations as a staff, and finding a new role and potentially new voice?
Yeah, well, first of all, I loved it. I loved um, I loved like hearing new ideas from the other coaches that I was working with. I'd been a head coach for so long, and so any new idea was either mine or came from a development thing that I'd gone to. So I loved working with a group of coaches that were really good at what they were doing. Um, I think working with like Troy specifically, he's quite a collaborative coach. He wants to hear everybody's ideas, so there was lots of runway there for us to be able to give our ideas and grow as a team. But also he knows what he wants. Like he's very, and so sometimes you'd present something and he would consider it and then be like, "Meh, we're gonna do it this way." And like I actually didn't mind that because it was to me it was I got to see some of not flaws in what I was presenting necessarily, but it being done a different way for me to grow as a coach and go, okay, like this is a different way. I'd never thought about it this way. Um, I do think at times I felt challenged because I wasn't sure if the answer I was going to give would align with what Coach Troy wanted.
Yeah.
So So I think it took half the season for me to be able to go, okay, I'm just going to give the answer. And if it's not right, I'll just go back to that athlete or those athletes and say, hey, I had a really great chat with Troy, and we're going to tweak what I said to you. But I think the risk of not saying anything and always deferring back is probably worse. So it definitely took some time because, like you said, I was pretty confident as a head coach in the things that I wanted to teach and the things that I wanted to do. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, is that going to be the same as what, our path is forward with this particular team? So there was challenges there for sure, but I loved it, and I love the experience because I do want to be a head coach in this league. And so having been an assistant, gives me a lot of perspective too. Even just like reflecting back on my time at Guelph and my assistant coach, and some of the things that I would do different now, having been an assistant and knowing, what her role was and how not how I treated her, but how I integrated her role. I think it would probably change a little bit now that I've had some experience as an assistant coach. So how I would use my assistants would change. If I'm a head coach again, I would be probably a little bit different in how I work with my assistants.
Yeah, I've got a good pal that's starting his first year as a head coach in the American League and has been a head coach for a number of years elsewhere. And when he got the gig, his first, he's like, man, he's like, I'm not coaching my stuff anymore. Like I got to do what the big club's doing. So he spent all summer, watching video with, the big team's head coach and learning about all this. And I hear him talk about it, and it sort of shifted where he's like, this is actually like, this is so good because I'm going to be forced to teach. And I would sort of liken it like if you were a chef and you only cook sort of one menu, and all of a sudden somebody says, hey, you got to cook, you've been cooking Greek food your whole life. Now you got to cook Chinese. Like you're just going to develop. It's the same kitchen, it's the same tools, but you're going to learn new skills. As much as that would be hard to do, I would sense that over the course of one's career, having that opportunity to kind of get forced into, you know, um, looking at the game through a bit of a different lens would be super valuable to get to do that.
Yeah, and I think like any coaches that are, even in minor hockey, the coaches that utilize their assistants and have like a lot of conversation with them, I think it goes a long way. And it allows your assistant coaches to kind of become an expert in one area. So they don't have to think about the big picture all the time. They can really dial in on one particular or two particular areas. Where I think like when I look back at Guelph, like there was definitely things that my assistant coach was doing that were specifically kind of her jobs, but I feel like there's probably more room there for me to have given her details in different areas that she could have built on, as opposed to, well, you do this and I do this, and but I take care of all the big picture thinking. I think that we probably spent a lot of time collaborating on things when we didn't need to, and not enough time building out some details when we probably needed to as well, like individually spending
Sure.
time like looking at different things. And I think that's the opening that I have now as an assistant, is that these are the things you're going to look at, but it's your job now to dive in, like what are the things you like, what are the things you don't like. And so I'm allowed to use my voice and my opinion, but I can go at it almost as a head coach on, these are the things that I would do, and have a little bit of evidence to back that up. And then if it's different than what we end up going with, that's okay, because that's just a different path, a different way.
Looking back at last year from an outsider's perspective, like it just seemed like it was everything must have happened so fast. Like I think when the schedule was released, like teams didn't even know what buildings they were playing all their games in, and I'm sure that extended to where you were practicing in some cases. Like when the year wrapped up, what did you and Troy and the rest of the staff say? Gosh, like I wish we had more time to get to this part of our game, or we didn't spend enough attention here, and therefore, what do you sort of what are some of the layers you might be looking to add to your team play with camp coming up?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we had like a 6 week training camp last year. It was crazy how long we ended up
Was it
having. And
really?
that, yeah, because players hadn't really been playing, especially some of our players that are well out of college. So they needed time. We didn't want anyone getting injured, and the league was still needed a runway. And so we started mid-November, and we didn't play our first game till January 1st. So it was 6 weeks.
When do
Um,
you start the season this year?
It hasn't been released yet, but it'll be around December 1st, I
Oh,
think.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so way more manageable. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's an extra month. Like, so our training camp's really short, 2 weeks of training camp this year, which is a pretty normal training
Yeah.
camp in pro. Um, so I actually think that 6 weeks of training camp, we probably thought we had so much time. And
Yeah.
so maybe, looking back, we probably needed to spend more time dialing into some specifics earlier, um, because it felt like we had all this time to get to it. Oh, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. And then the season started. And really, what we did well was establish like the way we were going to play, not necessarily the systems, but we really established how we were going to play the game and our mentality. And that was really important. And we had a tough start. I think we were 1-5 or something to start the season. Like it wasn't great. And then we went on this 11-game win streak and, ended up catapulting us into the first place, which we held on to throughout the season. And then I think, we, when you have a new team and a new group coming together like that in a new league, and there's no like expectations of what's going to happen and no knowledge of, really the other coaches and what they're going to do and how they're going to build their program. And so, I think when we got to playoffs, we had changed things quite a bit throughout the year. We tried this and it didn't quite work. And then it just slowly turned into this and then it slowly turned into that. And so, I think this year will probably be a little bit more organized about our structure before we start the season, like throughout training camp. And then in playoffs, again, there was a little bit of that. Well, we've got time. We won our first 2 games. Then we lost a game. We were like, it's okay. We'll get them on the next one. And then it's like, it's okay. We'll definitely get them on the 5th game. And there was just this like sense of we've got time. And it just, I think sometimes got away from us as a team, not just as a staff, but like that urgency to win and the urgency to, to build our structure and to play within it. I think is probably a bit of a priority for our group this year. Is just you just don't have time, and you don't have a lot of time to practice when you're in season either. It's like, in the NHL, you're playing so many games that you don't have a lot of time. We probably have a little bit more time to practice than men's pro,
Yeah.
but it's not a lot. And when you do practice, you're coming, you've just landed from Minnesota and then the next day you're practicing, and what are you trying to get out of that practice? Sometimes I think those decisions are, for a first year of pro, we had to figure out, what are the priorities, and when you've got, you really should only skate for 45 minutes. So what's the priority in those skates? So figuring those pieces out.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you. So you mentioned earlier about, when you're in college, like one of the adjustments you would look at or would be special teams. So that makes all kinds of sense. But at the pro level, and I mean, you could focus on a whole host of things, and all of a sudden, if you're focusing on too much, then you're not really focusing on anything. What would have been some of the other parts of the game that you learned to say, hey, like I just gotta, if we pay attention to these areas, be it through analytics or just the eyeball test, but these are the things that consistently game to game we're going to come back to, and if we're going to make adjustments, it's probably going to be in these areas.
Well, I think scoring chances for and against are probably the obvious one,
Sure.
like getting to look at, the trends of where the goals were coming from, and knowing that we got to get pucks to those areas. So, I mean, just like probably every league in the world, the goals are coming from the house.
Yeah.
That's where they're all coming from.
But it's how they
So the
get to
more,
the house, I think, is the,
that's right.
yeah.
And so that would be something that would be a big focus. And then same on the defensive side, like how are pucks getting into the inside of our defensive structure, and how do we make adjustments to make sure that if and when they get there, which inevitably they will, how are we going to handle that, and what are we going to do from those positions? And then I think how quickly we transition the puck and how quickly teams transition against us. Like, I think to me, that's a change, that going from university hockey or college hockey to pro, and even though pro didn't exist really for the women in a true sense before that, that is one of the areas that I think is lost on a lot of people. Like, you win or lose games in the neutral zone, how quickly you transition into offense and how quickly you kill a play defensively when it transitions against you. to me are key areas. Like obviously defensive zone play, all the things. But to me, scoring chances for and against, how are we getting it there? How is it getting into our area? And then how quickly can we transition and and go on offense to catch teams like on their heels,
Yeah,
basically.
got it. You also mentioned just a little bit of limited time. What have you learned about being efficient in your communication and teaching?
Yeah, I think it took a while last year. I think my approach this year would be a little bit different with video. Like I think last year when I'd sit down with a player to do video, we'd go through all of their shifts in a game, which like not a good idea. Sometimes players wanted that, but like if we're going to go through all their shifts, we can only pick two or three things that we're focusing on those shifts. So I think for me, it's 5 or 10 minutes of video at least once a week with every player, and then just touch points with players to see how they're feeling about their game, and not just like, hey, how'd you feel about your game? Oh yeah, it was good. Like digging in a little bit, like, well, what was good, and what do we need to focus on this week? Like, is there something that I can be looking for that you've been working on that you want me to acknowledge when I see it, or is there something that you recognize that you're struggling with? I can look for those things, and so just those a little bit deeper conversations. To me are something that moving forward is going to be important just because there's not a lot of time and there's a lot of players, and just figuring out. I also think like as a staff figuring out which players you connect with the best. Like I work with the D with Toronto, but I spent a lot of time last year towards the end of the year with a couple of forwards working on defensive coverage.
Mm,
And so not necessarily limiting our coaching staff to, well, he works with the forwards and she works with the D, just being a little bit more open to working with whoever needs help in an area and taking that on as an opportunity to grow with that player.
Um, so last year, again, these teams get thrown together, and in my opinion, if you give coaches time to prepare, like a whole off season, like things are going to change. I'm fascinated to see how the league plays out now that everybody kind of has a sense of like how teams their rosters are constructed, etc. And I sense that if last year in the PWHL was a game of checkers, this year is going to be more of a game of chess. Just with the amount of video and so the coaches can go back on. Um, with that being said, what are some of those? I mean, you mentioned scoring chances, but what are some of the other areas of the game that have proven to be kind of maybe an opportunity to give a team a competitive advantage?
Having home ice is always an advantage, like being able to match
Yeah.
lines, and I'm always curious about coaches that, do you match your best line against their best line, or can you match your hardest working line that's pretty good defensively but maybe doesn't have as much offensive side with their top line to leave your top line an opportunity to play against maybe a line that you feel is not as defensively strong? Is it forwards matching up with D? Like, are we looking to put our best line out against their 5-6 D? Or so I find that a fascinating piece, and
Totally.
that's something that I think last year running the D for me was definitely a challenge. Trying to figure out how much we use our top 2D, because obviously we needed them to defend, but we also wanted them to create offense. So could we try to double up on how we were using them? And um, if you look at some of our top D pairings numbers from last year, like they averaged stupid minutes per game, and we've got to figure out a way to not have that happen this year. But that was a growth, like a learning
Sure.
opportunity. How can we best use them? And so I think that's one area for sure that you're going to see coaches starting to have a bit more understanding of the lines and who's playing for each team. Like even just the lineups and the rosters, like knowing who each player is. It took some time to understand whose players brought what assets to their team. Um, what else do I think? I talked a little bit about the neutral zone, and um, it's funny. I'm interested to see if the women's pro game starts to look more like the men's as far as like the forechecking. I was just doing some video with our video coach the other day and noticed that we were doing goalie touches. Like anytime the goalie touches the puck, where are they moving it? What does that look like? Are our D's reporting to corners, or are our goalies bypassing them? All these questions, but it looks so different in our league because the forecheck comes so fast and so aggressive all the time. Like there's never a set breakout in our league where, in the men's game in regular season anyway, it's a little more like the goalies get it, they have time to look, and they make a play, and then it's like the other team accepts that they're going to have to try to kill the play in the neutral zone. And I just don't think that's the mentality right now in the women's program. So I wonder, some of that I think is the number of games that they play. Like to keep up that pace on the men's side is really hard for 82 games. Um, and in women's hockey, even at the college level, you're limited with the number of games. So you have this pace that you're constantly playing at and trying to turn pucks over. So I wonder if it's going to start to mimic the men's game or not. That's just a question that I have moving into next season. Like, are we going to see, really aggressive two-player forechecks? And as our players get better, if someone does do a two-player aggressive forecheck and our goalie has the puck, how quickly are we out of our zone and on an odd player rush going the other way, taking advantage of that? So just some questions around that.
That's interesting. I know, like just watching the last World Championships, the thing that struck me is you touched on is just how much more physical the women's game had become, and therefore a lot faster below the blue lines. But the other thing that really struck me is that the amount of the skill of angling and the amount of pucks that are stripped in open ice and not through collisions, but just cleanly with good sticks and good timing. Really, really stood out to me, and I sense that's something that could be, should be borrowed from the game. Especially at younger levels, and that's what stuck with me is just how important it is just to really focus on that with young kids. Um,
It's funny. Angling is like one of the least taught skills, I think.
Boring.
Or I know it's boring, but oh my
But I
gosh,
know it's
like,
so, but you got to make it fun, right? Because it's so important.
yeah, there's so many great angling games you can do, small area games that, teaches you how to. The thing that angling teaches in a game setting is the player with the puck learns that they can change their speed to beat an angle, and the angling player learns how to manipulate their speed and the other player to stop those things from happening. So I think it's as you said, angling is really important. And then it's funny, I was digging in a little bit on some stick details and stick on puck details with like I was looking specifically at Florida because why wouldn't you look at Florida? And like I barely, I mean, I don't know how long my list was of clips I was going to watch, and I think I got through 12 of them, and 8 of them were already on my list as examples of ways that they did such a good job of, and maybe it's happening across all the teams, but I knew that Florida was one of these teams that had really focused on it. So I do think stick details is another area that it's just sort of been lost in this skill development world that we live in, where we're constantly trying to be better with the puck all the time. We're coaching our players to be better with the puck, and we spend most of our time without the puck. So how do we get the puck back? And then what do we do when we get it back? So now that's the skill piece. So I think, you're right when you talk about that. And it's actually, I think that's probably a project that we're working on a little bit right now, is looking back at some of our pieces around stick details and even stick lifts. I think it's an underused skill that, because again, it's kind of boring to teach, but holy cow, like it's a game changer. Anyone who's a good stick lifter, either from behind or beside or in a battle, like it's amazing to me how those players stand out and they constantly are getting the puck, moving it, and then getting it back somewhere else. So um, big areas of skill development. And then when you add the contact into that, like especially in the women's game, I think that's an area that grew a lot last year. Not so much that the contact was there, but players learning how to play in contact situations, um, and so all of a sudden puck protection becomes a lot more important, and where you receive passes, like the placement of the puck when you receive passes. So when we talk about those details, those are the things that they didn't matter as much when you weren't playing with as much contact. And that's probably the same in the boys game. As they come through, all of a sudden they go into this contact game, and the kids that know where to put the puck are getting away with doing things that the big kids that can accept contact, it doesn't matter because they never have the puck. So kind of of all of those things together, those are some of the details that I think are so important for not just going into next season when you'll see it with the women, but in the younger levels, you're going to see it start to trickle down because it'll have to if they want to play at the next level.
Well, I'm going to give you a hack and a little bit of shameless self promotion here. But Mitch Love, assistant coach with Washington, we dropped a presentation he did on stick on puck last week. It's awesome. Some great,
I saw part of it.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Yeah. So you got
yeah.
Bay's got some good Florida clips in there. Uh Real quick, Rach, before we let you go, any books, resources, experiences that you've had that you found have been really helpful for you in your coaching journey?
Hmm. Gosh, I love Simon Sinek's Start with Why.
Yeah.
I just think it's such a great book and it transcends business all the way through to sports and lots of other areas as well. Um, what's her book? Hold on a sec. I got to think of the name of her book. Wolfpack. It's by Abby Wambach. It's a bit more of a. It's probably I wouldn't call it like a. It's written from her perspective on how her life was so different than. It's about being part of a wolf pack and a group of women in a sports environment, but also a little bit around like there's some equity pieces in there, and so it's maybe got a bit of a feminist twist on it, but it's got such good little lessons. It's like Legacy, the rugby book. Legacy,
Yeah.
is that what it's called?
Yeah, it
So
is.
it's similar in that like it's like short chapters, little bite-sized pieces, but anyone that is coaching a girls team specifically, it's an easy read. I totally recommend that you introduce it to your team. You either have one book and everyone reads it and they like kind of sign off after they read it and give it to the next person, or or you study a chat. Everyone gets a copy and you study a chapter. The chapters are so short, but they're so impactful. We used it at Guelph for a couple of years. It's still actually somewhere in circulation. Like it ends up, it got released in the summer and then it gets mailed. Someone's goes to Italy and then it gets, mailed from Italy over to
Yeah.
BC where we've got a player, and really, really impactful little book that I use with my women's team that I really like.
That's awesome. I'm going to check that one out. I haven't heard of that. Last question. So we know, I think for hockey fans, we know Natalie Spooner, we know Sarah Nurse, and kind of those big names in the women's game. But can you maybe, you got some time here, shine a spotlight? Who are some players on the Toronto Sceptres roster who maybe aren't household names yet, but are must watch when folks come to the rink?
Mm,
Not to pick
tricky,
favorites, but pick favorites.
tricky question.
Yeah, I know.
Some of the obvious, one of the obvious answers is probably Julia Gosling. She's going to be, it's going to be her first year. She was our first draft pick this year. She's someone that, as a young player, I think it's going to be great to watch. Obviously, she was our first draft pick this year, so there's some star power there. She's been with the senior national team a little bit. She's got, a little bit of, well, she's got like Spooner size. And I think, a bit of that mentality of being a power forward. And so I'm excited to see her development this year. Like, I think there's a lot there that is going to continue to grow as the year goes on and she gets into the pro game. I think the pro game is going to be really good for her. A lot of our players coming in from college have been everything for their college team. Like,
Sure.
they've, not that they haven't been held accountable, but they've been allowed to almost do whatever. So I do think um, a little bit of structure in their game and a little more details is going to be really good for someone like Julie Gosling. And she's had instruction. Obviously, she's been with the national team a bit, so she's already partway there. On the back end, I really love. I think if fans haven't noticed her as much, but Allie Monroe is like she's not a superstar. She's an East Coaster, and she just plays the game hard. She's really hard to play against. She gets around the ice like you don't realize. She's like sneaky fast. She's got a great stride. She's really physical. So she is someone that I think her game is going to continue to grow as well. Like she's never been. She was like probably a 3, 4, 5D at college, and she's kind of in the same spot in the pro game. And that's, you build your identity when you're that player, and you're not going from a first pair to a 6D all of a sudden in
Yeah.
pro. Like, who you are, and she knows who she is. She plays the game the right way. She's one that I think is going to take some more steps this year, just being really consistent. If you watch her, you enjoy watching her, especially if you like the physicality in the game. she's mean. She can be mean on the ice, and but in a way that's within the rules most of the time. And then you've got like our Renata and Joss, who are household names. Callie Flanagan's another one that's she was with the U.S. national team for years, but she's sort of in and out of their group now,
Yeah.
and she's small, but she's really quick, and she's got a great shot from the point. And I think for her, like she really had to change her style of game last year. Like we asked her to change. And so she's another one that I think you're going to see her create a lot more offense this year. I think she's going to have a bit more confidence with the puck, and so she's another one on the back end that I think would be good for people to be looking at. Give my D some love.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, you know what? I'm so pumped to see the visuals this year. I think I know you guys are moving. It's the Coca-Cola Arena? Is that what they call it, or used to be?
Yeah, Coca-Cola Coliseum.
Coca-Cola Coliseum. I think
I
just
think so.
I think we're going to see a full house. Teams in their new unis. It's going to be awesome, and as good as last year was, I feel like this thing's just getting rolling. So best of luck to you and the Sceptres this year, and thanks for joining us, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.